think Australian audiences understand Liv, Jess Henwick's character, a little more and are more on her side. Americans are more on Julia's side and kind of like, well, why is she drinking so much and all this stuff. So it's been interesting to see how it plays just culturally in different spaces. I think.
And I understand it was, based kind of loosely on a documentary. So I wondered if you could just start with your kind of the origins of watching that documentary for the first time. Was it quite kind of instant that you felt you could kind of make a kind of narrative feature out of this?
I don't know. I mean, I immediately was attracted to, I mean, that's a weird word, but to the documentary because it's about two Scandinavian women in an Aussie pub, and I hadn't seen the Australian outback depicted that way, like through sort of not only sort of a female lens, but foreigners in that culture who were trying to make sense of the culture and not accepting of a lot of the behavior that they were coming across. And that to me was different and new. And I thought, okay, maybe that could be a cool kind of film idea. I also thought it could be a good role for Julia Garner, who I loved working with on The Assistant. And so it was a nice excuse to kind of bring her to my hometown and do something different.
And was that kind of part of the appeal as well of making a film in Australia as kind of, as an Australian yourself?
Yeah, a little bit. My parents wanted me to spend more time with them, and there's a little bit of that. And I also am an Australian filmmaker, and I hadn't made a movie in Australia, which felt weird, so it's nice to do something back home and to feel more in touch with, the community there.
Was there anything about that documentary, any kind of like small details that kind of stuck with you and you thought you kind of had to have something like that in the film, just kind of a small detail that...
I think, honestly, the girls are really interesting in the documentary because of the strength they showed up against all these kind of horrific circumstances. They were and it's a very gentle strength, that's kind of Scandinavian thing, but they were very kind of able to say no, able to say this, you can't speak to me like that without it feeling, aggressive. There's something really lovely about them finding their way through it. And I felt like that was interesting to me. And maybe coming off the back of a movie where the character was sort of had to accept how rotten the system was, to see something where someone was standing up against that sort of system and challenging it a little was interesting. And yeah.
I think what's kind of really scary about the film is that, you never quite know when something's going to erupt, when there's kind of that low level kind of danger at all times that could kind of, explode at any point. Is that quite hard to kind of maintain that tension over a film? How do you kind of go about striking that balance as a director?
I mean, it's definitely a writing thing first and foremost, but then I guess it's lighting and it's sound and it's music and it's a lot of it hangs on Julia's face and her perception of the events. And she's so good at everything she does. She's so expressive, and she can kind of telegraph fear really well and very easily with just the smallest movement of an eye or nose. You know what I mean? A little twitch, and you're like, uh-oh, she's afraid. There's something she does which is really magical, which I knew in The Assistant worked. So we kind of, really amped it up here on this one.
Yeah, is that experience of kind of writing a role for someone when you've already got them in mind, does that kind of make the writing process different than if you're kind of not sure who's going to play it yet?
Maybe. I like to picture someone even if I don't know who I'm going to cast. I like to kind of have an idea in my head of what they look like. But with Julia, I just know I can give her anything. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. I'm able to throw anything at her and she'll be able to make it work. She's really that great.
Yeah. And, you talked about how, it's kind of bringing a different lens to, a film set in the outback. Did you look at kind of other outback set films, stuff like Wake and Fright and that kind of stuff for kind of inspiration in terms of the tone and the kind of, I guess, a kind of almost nightmarish quality that it can have at times?
Definitely. Of course I've watched Wake and Fright again, and I read Ted Kotcheff's book, and I remember there was a chapter where he talks about releasing real flies in the bar to make it feel real, and I called my producers can we release flies? And they were like, no. So I tried to to replicate some of that stuff, but we also didn't want to be the Wake and Fright is a masterpiece, and we're not trying to steal it or be, trying to copy it in any way, but we did definitely, there are references and there are connections between the two movies. I don't know, a lot of those outback horror movies we watched, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and those kind of movies where they're out for an adventure and things go wrong is kind of where we ended up landing. But a lot of it is the documentary meets The Assistant, and those two kind of, the sort of whatever that, mix them together and you kind of get the Royal Hotel.
Yeah, and how important was it to get the design right of the pub, kind of find the right locations and all that kind of stuff to kind of make it feel I guess authentically and You know.
I mean, we looked for, how do I, we had to find like the exterior first, I guess, and we were looking for like a double story pub. And so we needed to, I mean, there was a few of them around, to be honest, but it was actually the first one we saw
Mm.
was the one we chose.
Yeah.
And it was on a road that was heading up to the other ones. And it was a abandoned pub, but in a tiny town with a few people. It was 29 people live dotted around it,
Mm.
but there's nothing else in that town, essentially. So we had to figure out if we could accommodate people, how we could logistically make it work, but we somehow made it work. And then we had to build the interior because we couldn't afford to keep everyone out there for that long. We built the interior in a, oops, touching my mic. We built the interior in a pub in a studio, sorry, in Adelaide. And then it was about kind of making it feel, I guess what we wanted to sense is that this place, the Royal Hotel, used to be this kind of grand establishment and has since sort of fallen into this sort of decay and ruin and is sort of holding itself together by, sticky tape and things like that. So the production designer, Leah Popple, who I've worked with before, was able to just give that kind of natural, aged quality to the set, which was amazing. So it feels lived in and real.
Hannah and Liv obviously react in quite different ways to their surroundings. Have you seen that kind of when people have reacted to the film that they maybe fall more on one camp than the other, or do you think it is kind of people see a bit of themselves in both the characters? Do you think?
I think like when you're young and you're backpacking, you're kind of, or whatever, traveling, you often have to, that dynamic sort of naturally happens. Like somebody has to take control of like where you're going, like with Google Maps, and somebody has to check us into the hotel or do whatever these things are. And the other person can drink a little more and be a little hungover and kind of trot along beside them.
Yeah.
And so that felt pretty natural to me. I mean, I think Australian audiences understand Jess Henwick's character a little more and are more on her side.
Mm.
Americans are more on Julia's side and kind of like, well, why is she drinking so much and all this stuff. So it's been interesting to see how it plays just culturally in different spaces. I think generationally too, I think younger women are more accepting of Liv's behaviour and older women are kind of more whatever. I'm kind of, mad about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting. It plays differently everywhere. So it's just, as it's sort of rolling out now, we're sort of getting into theatres and people are kind of getting a chance to see it. It's changing up kind of my own even thoughts about the characters, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of the male characters in the film as well, it's interesting how it kind of seems that this kind of toxic environment is kind of detrimental to them as well, especially Hugo Weaving's character with his with his relationship to alcohol. How important was it for those characters to be kind of three-dimensional and for there to be moments of tenderness in amongst that kind of more kind of horrible kind of attitudes that they have?
Yeah, I don't know. We have a lot of love for those men, even though they're all a mess and they're all clearly problematic. They're all broken and trying to. We had to, in order to write them, kind of understand a little why they're behaving this way. And I guess it was about kind of they're searching for connection. They don't know how to connect. They're trying in any way they can to get these girls' attention, and essentially the girls are saying no. And so that was really, I mean, it was just an exercise of like figuring out what their weaknesses were. Is it alcohol or is it, aggression, or what was kind of keeping them from being able to just be a normal good guy,
Yeah.
essentially. The casting helps. Like each of those guys brought a lot of love for these roles and were able to kind of flesh them out and make them feel real. And it's funny, in America, Americans think that they're villains. They can't see the light and shade in them as much as we can here. And I think in the UK too, but Australians as well can see a little more in there, a little kind of have a little more warmth for them, I guess, or
Yeah.
appreciation for them.
Yeah.